The sound of shattering glass still rang in my ears as I stepped out onto the driveway. The Lamborghini sat under the porch light, its body clawed and scarred, gasoline and paint mixing in the air like a wound left open on a symbol of pride. I wasn't angry. Anyone else might have screamed, but I just stood still, breathing slowly until the rhythm of my pulse matched the silence around me. You know that burning feeling when someone keeps disrespecting your home, thinking you're just some harmless old guy. When politeness doesn't help anymore, well, that person just made the biggest mistake of their small, privileged life. They picked the wrong neighbor to mess with, on the broken glass. A streak of red nail polish shimmered under the light, and I knew this fight would be settled by truth, not by fists. The air was sharp, clean, almost surgical. I crouched near the rear fender, eyes tracing the pattern of the damage. Whoever did this had patience, not rage. The cuts on the paint were deliberate, nearly symmetrical, like someone taking pleasure in precision. It wasn't random vandalism, it was personal. My reflection warped across the glossy black surface, sliced apart by the cracks. That car wasn't just a toy. It was evidence now. I pulled my phone from my pocket and began taking photos. Angles, timestamps, and close-ups of every inch. Years in law enforcement had taught me one thing: emotion is the enemy of proof. A faint whiff of perfume lingered under the stronger scent of fuel, floral, synthetic, something you'd smell in a suburban living room where control came disguised as civility. My jaw tightened. I had smelled that same perfume before, floating over a clipboard and fake smiles during HOA meetings. I didn't need to say her name out loud. My mind said it for me. Karen Ellison, the self-appointed queen of Maple Crest. I'd seen her power games for months. Letters taped to doors, violation slips about mailbox colors, and trash bins left out 5 minutes too long. She thought rules were weapons, and she wielded them with manicured fingers. Most people just rolled over, paid the fines, or apologized for nothing. I didn't. Maybe that's what started this war. I walked back inside, boots clicking on the tile floor. The house felt cold, still half lit from the exterior lamps. I sat at the dining table and opened my laptop. The screen reflected in the glass of a framed photo on the wall. Me in uniform, badge catching the sun, sheriff of Silverwood County. Retired now, technically, but some habits never fade. The footage from my front camera loaded slowly. I had installed that system myself. No cloud service, just direct storage. It took a moment. Then the timeline appeared. Time-stamped 1:37 a.m. A figure moved through the shadows. Short hair, heavy coat, cautious steps. She stopped at the edge of the driveway, looked around, and pulled something from her bag. A metal rod, maybe a crowbar. The way she swung it wasn't random. She picked her angles. The windshield shattered, the sound crisp through the night mic. Then she leaned in close to the door, pressing a hand against the glass. That's when I saw it. The flash of red nails. I paused the video. The image froze mid-motion, red against black. I zoomed in until the pixels broke apart. It wasn't a stranger's crime. It was arrogance, entitlement, the belief that power meant immunity. She thought she could cross my property line and still sleep fine. I saved the clip to an external drive, labeled it Evidence 1, and slid it into a small lockbox under the table. My desk drawer already held a folder of her letters, false violation notices, threats of HOA fines, and even one about community safety concerns citing my service dog as a disturbance. Each page is dated, signed, and ready. I hadn't planned to use them until tonight. The clock on the wall read 2 a.m. I should have been exhausted. But instead I opened a blank document and started drafting a preliminary report. Not an official one. Just the bones, description of damage, evidence type, suspect identity, and motive indicators. The kind of structure any officer would recognize, even half asleep. I saved it as Incident Draft 001 and closed the lid. The law moves best when it's already half written. Outside, the darkness pressed close against the windows. The neighborhood slept under its own illusion of order. Neatly trimmed lawns, quiet streets, porch lights like sentinels, A place that looked peaceful enough to hide the rot beneath it. That's what HOA rules did best. They made silence look like civility. I poured a glass of water and stood by the kitchen window, watching the reflection of the damaged car in the faint light. It looked smaller now, less like a trophy and more like a trigger. I didn't need revenge. I needed patience, and the patience was already built into the system. I'd give her the paperwork instead. When the first light of dawn slid across the driveway, it caught the broken glass scattered like frost. I stepped over it carefully, locked the garage, and paused. Behind the perfect hedges and freshly painted fences, every curtain was closed. People always pretended not to see. That was fine. The proof would see for them. The air carried that faint, mechanical hum of sprinklers down the block. Steady, artificial, pretending to be peace. Tonight, she thought she had won, but this wasn't over. She had crossed from nuisance into crime, from gossip into evidence. And in my world, evidence always talks louder than noise. I looked one last time at the Lamborghini as the sun rose higher, its light catching the cracks in the windshield. Not anger, not grief, just clarity. Some wars are fought in courtrooms and meeting halls, not on battlefields, and this one had just begun. It started long before the night of broken glass. Back then, Maple Crest looked like the kind of place people moved to for peace. Fresh asphalt, trimmed lawns, and mailboxes lined up like soldiers. Every neighbor waved, smiling the same rehearsed smile. I moved in thinking I had finally found quiet after 20 years in law enforcement. What I found instead was a kingdom built on paperwork and fear, ruled by one woman who mistook control for community. Her name was Karen Ellison, and she ran the HOA like a private army dressed in good manners. At first, I didn't pay much attention. The board meetings happened every second Thursday in the clubhouse, a space that smelled of coffee and carpet cleaner. Karen always sat at the head of the table, a folder labeled compliance in front of her. She had the posture of someone who never expected to be questioned. People nodded when she spoke, even when she was wrong. The first time I attended, she argued about the shade of blue allowed for front doors. I remember thinking it was absurd, but everyone else acted as if it were gospel. That should have been my first warning. Karen liked rules the way pyromaniacs like matches. She didn't enforce them to protect anything. She enforced them to feel control. It began with polite reminders about grass height and trash bins. Then came the parking restrictions and fines for porch lights left on past 11. Every week brought a new notice typed neatly with her signature at the bottom. "We must maintain the character of Maple Crest," she wrote. That character, as it turned out, was whatever she decided it was. When she learned I had been a sheriff, she smiled too warmly. "Then you understand structure," she said. But behind her words was a challenge, not respect. I told her my house sat outside the HOA boundary line, which meant her rules didn't apply. The smile froze for half a second before returning. "We'll make sure the standards are consistent for everyone," she replied. My jaw tightened, but I let it pass. People like her thrive on confrontation. I preferred documentation. The first letter came a week later. Violation notice, improper vehicle storage. My patrol truck had been parked near the curb while I repaved the driveway. The HOA had no authority there, but she posted the notice on my door anyway, laminated and signed. I ignored it. The next week brought a new one titled Community Safety Concern. Inside was a photo of my truck with the words, "This vehicle may reduce pedestrian visibility. Please relocate to preserve the harmony of Maple Crest." Signed, Acting Compliance Officer K. Ellison. I felt a flash of anger. Quick and sharp, like static under the skin. I wanted to confront her, to call out the absurdity of it, but I didn't. Instead, I added it to the growing folder on my desk. Anger fades. Paper lasts. The neighbors started to talk quietly. Mrs. Daly, the widow 2 houses down, received a fine for leaving her flag up after sunset. A young couple on Pineview Court had to repaint their shutters because Karen claimed the color disrupted neighborhood harmony. No one stood up to her. Fear, when wrapped in politeness, can look a lot like cooperation. The HOA meetings became a theater, Karen dictating, others nodding, and one by one, the people who disagreed with her moved away. Her rise to president wasn't sudden, but it wasn't honest either. The former chair, A retired accountant named Paul Riggs resigned after a private discussion with her. He told me later she had threatened to audit his financial handling of the HOA fund. She hinted at improprieties that didn't exist, and the board quietly voted her in to avoid embarrassment. A week later, the HOA newsletter announced her as president, describing her as a stabilizing voice for our community. Stabilizing was one word for it. Karen's power grew with every rule she invented. She began issuing fines directly, bypassing formal votes. Her emails became public declarations, naming repeat offenders without naming them, everyone knowing who she meant. One afternoon, I saw her pacing the cul-de-sac, clipboard in hand, photographing driveways. When she caught me watching, she smiled. "Documentation," she said, voice honeyed but tight. "We're keeping standards high." I told her that standards without fairness were just control. Her eyes narrowed for half a second before she looked away. Weeks turned into months, and the pattern didn't stop, it escalated. She spoke about me in meetings I didn't attend, calling me a potential disruption. Neighbors stopped waving. Her influence ran through the neighborhood like wires under concrete, invisible but electrified. The system she built was efficient fear disguised as formality. She didn't need to raise her voice. The paperwork did it for her. Then came the new proposal. During a late board meeting, she presented it as a reform. "For neighborhood safety," she said, "all residents, including those adjacent to Maple Crest boundaries, must register their vehicles with the HOA. It was written to sound cooperative, but everyone knew who it targeted. The motion passed without a single objection. Karen folded her hands, looked directly at me, and said, "We all follow the same rules, Sheriff." The word sheriff was meant as an insult, a reminder that my badge was now just a memory. My hands tightened around the chair until I heard it creak. She thought she had me cornered. That night, I sat on my porch, the air still and heavy. The neighborhood looked perfect under the streetlights. But it wasn't peace. It was control pretending to be peace. Karen's world thrived on that illusion. Neat lawns and silent windows concealing resentment. She believed order was power. And for a while, it was. But order without justice always breaks down eventually. I took a slow breath, letting the tension fade just enough to think clearly. Across the street, her porch light flickered once and steadied again. It caught the edge of her mailbox, bright for a second, like light skimming glass. That was her empire, fragile and polished, waiting for the first real crack. By spring, the game had changed. Karen no longer hid behind polite notices or soft smiles. She had tasted power, and power never stops at enough. The HOA letters became sharper, the accusations more personal, the tone colder. It wasn't about neighborhood standards anymore. It was about control. I could feel her eyes on me even when I couldn't see her car parked near the corner. She had made me her project, and she wasn't subtle about it. The first real escalation came with the photos. One morning, a manila envelope sat in my mailbox with no name or postage. Inside were printed images of my backyard, close enough to read the serial number on my grill. Someone had been near my property line at night. The shots were taken through the fence slats, grainy but close. My hands went cold as I turned the pages, a familiar instinct waking up in the pit of my stomach, the one that senses danger before logic catches up. Whoever took them wanted me to know they could. I looked toward Karen's house, blinds half open, a shadow moving behind them. She was getting bold. I logged the photos and filed them under unverified surveillance. It wasn't enough for a report yet, but it was evidence of intent. I wasn't about to give her what she wanted, a reaction. Small tyrants like her feed on emotional response. Instead, I tracked her pattern. Harassment arrived in cycles, a fake violation about grass height, a warning about unapproved lighting, then a public community standards update listing unnamed but obvious offenders. My driveway appeared third on the board, captioned "Ongoing Visibility Concern." No names, but everyone knew. By the time she escalated to forgery, the groundwork was set. The email came from the official HOA address, complete with logo and timestamp. Attached was a photo showing my truck parked across the sidewalk, blocking access. The image was doctored. The shadow under the truck ran in two directions. I checked my security feed from that morning. The truck hadn't moved. She had used her board credentials to access the system and send the message through the HOA admin panel. That gave her digital fingerprints, whether she realized it or not. I saved the email with a metadata log and chain of custody note, preserving header data and source routing. Every small detail mattered. The copy went on to an encrypted drive labeled Evidence 2. It wasn't paranoia. It was a procedure. Years of training had taught me that truth isn't what you feel. It's what you can prove. At the next HOA meeting, she stood in front of the crowd like a preacher in pearls. "We all must uphold our community's image," she said, voice smooth as glass. "Certain individuals believe they're above the rules. That's not what Maple Crest represents." The words carried weight not because of their meaning, but because of their silence. No one dared contradict her. She turned slightly, her eyes landing on me for a fraction of a second. I felt a pulse rise behind my ribs, but my face stayed still. She was baiting me in front of witnesses. I'd seen that tactic before. After the meeting, she intercepted me in the hallway. Her perfume reached me before her voice. "You should really consider cooperation," she said softly. "We could avoid all this tension if we agreed on expectations." Her tone carried that mock sweetness of someone who believes they've already won. I met her gaze. "The law doesn't run on expectations," I said. She smiled. "Oh, Sheriff, this isn't about law. It's about respect." I watched her walk away, clipboard under one arm, the heels of her shoes clicking like punctuation marks on the tile. In the following weeks, her tactics shifted from nuisance to exhaustion. Anonymous letters claimed my property devalued nearby homes. A delivery driver handed me a notice about unpaid HOA fees that didn't exist. Each accusation required a written rebuttal. It wasn't meant to win. It was meant to drain time. Bureaucratic warfare at its pettiest. Still, I answered everyone, documented every step, and stored every page. She wanted chaos. I was giving her a record. By early summer, the tension in Maple Crest was visible even in daylight. Neighbors no longer stopped to talk. Conversations cut short when her SUV rolled by. Fear moved quietly but efficiently, like current through a wire. She didn't need to shout. Her system did the talking, yet I could sense it shifting. The power she built was starting to curdle. Even the loyal ones avoided her now, offering smiles that didn't reach their eyes. She was losing the room without realizing it. One night, just before midnight, I noticed headlights sweep across my living room wall. Her SUV again, idling at the curb for a full minute before pulling away. I didn't move, didn't call anyone. I just watched the reflection fade, memorizing the sound of her engine as it disappeared down the block. The next morning, a new notice appeared on the bulletin board. "Unauthorized security systems subject to review." My system. My house. The message couldn't be clearer. That evening, I went into the garage and opened the folder I had built over months. Photos, letters, recordings, the forged email with metadata intact. I checked the timestamps one more time. Every entry lined up like pieces of a slow-moving trap. She thought she was tightening the rope around my neck. She didn't realize I was letting her build her own noose. Maple Crest looked serene from the window porch lights glowing. Hedges trimmed. Driveways clean. A portrait of order. But order without truth doesn't last. Karen Ellison's kingdom was spreading like a single crack through glass, small enough to miss until the moment it shatters. It happened on a Thursday. The air was still, heavy with that kind of silence that feels like the calm before a storm. I had gone to bed early, half thinking the worst was already behind me. Then came the sound, sharp and violent. The scream of shattering glass tore through the night and pulled me upright before I could even think. Training kicks in before emotion does. I grabbed my phone, switched on the porch light, and stepped outside. The world had changed in 1 second. My Lamborghini sat under the pale glow, its windshield fractured into a spider web of light. The damage was deliberate, controlled, almost surgical. Whoever did it hadn't come to destroy. They'd come to send a message. I walked closer, noting the pattern of impact, the small metallic scrape marks near the door. 50 feet away. Movement. Someone slipping into the dark. Coat flashing once before disappearing. I didn't chase. I memorized direction and speed. Instinct told me to document, not react. I crouched by the car, letting my eyes adjust. There. Near the edge of the glass, a faint red glint under the porch light. Not blood, but paint. Cosmetic. Deliberate. The hand behind it was obvious, though the proof would come later. I photographed the scene quickly. Wide, close, angled, and time-stamped. Each click felt mechanical, efficient. Then I pulled back, exhaled once, and steadied my breathing. Evidence over anger, always. 15 minutes later, the responding officers arrived. I recognized one of them, a fresh academy graduate, still carrying that mix of curiosity and nerves. The older officer spoke first. "What do we have property damage?" I said. "Possible suspect seen leaving eastbound." The rookie squinted at the car. "That's deliberate." I nodded. "Check the windshield pattern. Impact from above. Not straight on." He whistled softly. "You sure you don't want to call this in as felony vandalism?" "Not yet," I said. "Let's get the documentation first." Inside. I loaded the security footage. The camera angle from the porch caught her perfectly. 1:37 a.m., figure in a dark coat. Moving with intent, striking the car with a metal tool, pausing only to press a hand against the glass before walking off. The older officer leaned in. "That looks like our HOA president." "It is," I said. "Karen Ellison." The rookie turned, half laughing out of disbelief. "You're serious?" I didn't answer. I just rewound the footage and froze it on the moment of contact. Her face half lit by the porch light. Enough to identify. Not enough for her to deny. The officers marked the scene, collected fragments, and took my statement. I guided them through the evidence chain as they packed the samples. "Include footage metadata with the initial report," I said. "Chain of custody starts with a timestamp at 1:47. The senior officer nodded. "Understood. You want to press charges, now I'll hold," I said. "Let's make sure it sticks." They understood the tone. A professional keeping control. Once they left, the silence returned. Heavy again, but different this time. Controlled. Contained. Back inside. I compiled everything: the photos, the footage, the officer notes, and the extracted audio. Each file is labeled and indexed, then copied to an encrypted drive. The process calmed me more than sleep ever could. Every line entered was a barrier against chaos. I saved the draft report, closed the laptop, and leaned back in the chair. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room like white noise. Then the phone buzzed. One new voicemail. I played it on speaker, already knowing whose voice would fill the room. "You think you can ignore me, Sheriff?" The words slurred with anger, clipped by frustration. "You think that badge still means something? This neighborhood follows my rules." Then a click. The message ended. My fingers stayed on the phone for a moment before pressing save. I filed it under Audio 1, another piece for the record. By sunrise. The neighborhood had already learned. Curtains moved when I stepped outside. People peeked, but didn't speak. The car sat in the driveway like evidence of something they all wished wasn't real. Maple Crest had always looked perfect. Lawns symmetrical. Driveways clean, but now the illusion had cracked. Fear travels faster than rumor. Across the cul-de-sac. Karen's SUV idled for a few seconds before rolling away. She wanted me to see her. I did. At noon. The official case number arrived by email. I attached it to my file, logged it, and forwarded the package to my contact downtown. No message, no call. Silence is the loudest statement you can make to someone who thrives on reaction. I wanted her to think she still had the upper hand, still controlled the game. The truth was simpler. The evidence chain had already locked her inside it. That night, I stood at the edge of the driveway, looking at what was left of the windshield, under the streetlight. The cracks caught the reflection of the sky, each line a reminder of intent. I didn't feel anger or satisfaction, just certainty. The system would handle her now. It only needed time. Karen Ellison believed she was teaching me a lesson in submission. She was wrong. The balance had shifted, and she didn't even know it. The weeks after the incident felt like the pause between thunderclaps, a tense stillness that could break at any moment. Karen vanished from sight, her absence louder than her presence had ever been. Neighbors spoke in half sentences, lowering their voices when they saw me outside. Every curtain seemed drawn a little tighter, as if the whole neighborhood was waiting to see who would move first. But I knew this kind of silence. It wasn't peace, it was a calculation. 3 weeks later, an email arrived titled Correction of Misunderstanding. It was polite, polished, and written by a lawyer. Karen was cooperating fully and regretted any confusion. The phrasing was perfect, detached, the kind you use when you think language itself can erase guilt. I read it twice and closed my laptop. If she had counsel now, it meant she wasn't retreating. She was preparing to shift the ground under me again. I walked into the garage and looked at the car, the new windshield shining like unbroken glass, and knew the calm was temporary. When the HOA meetings resumed, her chair waited at the front of the room, empty but untouched. The next week, she walked in like she had never left. No apologies, no hesitation. Her presence drew every eye in the room. She smiled faintly, nodded, and began. "Let's proceed with the agenda," she said, voice smooth and rehearsed. The illusion of normalcy was almost convincing until she reached the topic of security. "Some residents have installed unapproved systems," she said. "We will need to review them for compliance." Her glance toward me lasted half a heartbeat. I didn't respond. My stillness seemed to bother her more than words could. After the meeting, she intercepted me by the exit. "You look tired," she said softly. "It must be exhausting, keeping everything under control." I met her eyes. "Some people confuse control with order," I said. Her smile tightened. "Control is what keeps people civilized." She turned, leaving the faint scent of her perfume in the air, and for the first time, I noticed her composure had small cracks. Control had become her shield and her cage. 2 days later, the handyman fixing my fence mentioned something odd. "Your garage lock's new," he said casually. "Did you replace it?" My stomach dropped. I hadn't. The lock had been changed since the incident, and the only one authorized to modify HOA property was the board president. Her. That meant she had access long before the attack. It wasn't rage that drove her that night. It was premeditation. I compared the serial numbers. One was standard. The other came from a vendor under HOA accounts. The signature on the order was hers. The next morning, I met with the district attorney. I handed him the file, emails, footage, lock orders, and her voicemail. "This establishes intent," he said. "She used her position for access. That's trespass, property tampering, maybe more. File it," I said. He didn't need to ask if I was sure. The system would move at its own pace now, slow but certain. A few days later, officers came to serve the warrant. She didn't resist. She stood on her porch, expression calm, as if she had rehearsed the arrest itself. The neighborhood watched from behind curtains for a place obsessed with order. It was the most honest moment we had ever had, but control never dies quietly. A few days after her release, I returned home late and saw her waiting near my mailbox. Her car idled half across my driveway, engine rumbling. She looked smaller somehow, but her eyes still burned. "You really want to ruin me?" she asked. "You think anyone will thank you for this?" I said nothing. "You did this to yourself," I finally said. "You crossed the line." She stepped closer, her voice shaking between fury and fear. "You think your badge makes you better? You're just another man scared to lose control." I let her finish. Then I lifted my phone and pressed record. "You're recording me," she snapped. "I'm documenting," I said. "It's what I do." Her face froze for a second, realization flickering too late. She turned, slammed the car door, and sped off into the dark. That recording was enough. The next morning, I sent it to the prosecutor's office. By evening, the warrant for rearrest was signed. It was simple this time. No argument, no performance. The officers picked her up quietly, the same way you remove a dangerous object from a familiar place. I didn't go outside to watch. The sound of the patrol car was enough. Justice doesn't need an audience. It just needs patience. 3 nights later, I came home to find the front door slightly ajar. My body reacted before my mind did. I stepped inside slowly, hand near my holster, eyes scanning corners. The house was silent except for the steady hum of the ceiling fan. In the living room, a framed photograph lay broken on the floor. My academy graduation. Nothing else was touched. It wasn't theft. It was defiance. One last attempt to remind me she could still reach me. I picked up the photo and turned it face down on the table. The message was received. The next morning, I called my contact at the county office. She violated release terms. I said. The answer was short. We'll handle it. By evening, they had her in custody again. This time, there would be no return. I sat in the quiet kitchen, hands around a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and felt the weight in my chest loosen. Not relief, not triumph, just the certainty that the storm had finally spent itself. Outside, the sky was dark and heavy, but no rain came. The streetlights reflected in the repaired glass of my car like fragments of an old wound healed but still visible. Maple Crest would return to its order soon enough. Trimmed lawns and polite nods pretending none of it ever happened. But I would remember. She had believed control was strength. I had learned it was just fear in disguise. In the end, calm was the sharpest weapon. Courtrooms have their own kind of silence, different from the calm of a neighborhood night or the stillness that follows destruction. This silence is heavy, built from waiting, judgment, and the quiet weight of truth. It has a pulse, slow but steady, and it carries the sound of consequences before they are spoken aloud. When I stepped inside that morning, the air was colder than I expected. The ceiling fans turned lazily overhead, and the murmur of papers shifting broke the rhythm every few seconds. Karen sat on the opposite side of the aisle, hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture perfect. She looked composed again, but it was the kind of composure you wear like armor. Under the harsh white lights, even her confidence seemed thin. The case had moved faster than most expected. The evidence was too strong, the pattern too deliberate. My testimony was brief, built on facts and timestamps. There was no emotion in my voice because the truth did not need it. The footage, the lock replacement orders, the HOA records, the audio messages, all of it formed a chain too clean to break. Her attorney tried to paint her as a woman overwhelmed by duty, someone who had lost perspective under pressure, but the prosecutor did not let it stand. Intent, he reminded the court, is not erased by excuses. It is revealed through choice. When he showed the jury the matching logs of her access times to the HOA database alongside the moments of harassment, her story collapsed in silence. Karen avoided my gaze through most of the proceedings. When our eyes did meet, her expression was unreadable. Not anger, not shame, just a hollow calculation. She was still searching for an angle, even here, but the room was no longer hers. Every rule she had twisted, every document she had forged, was now a thread of her own undoing. The judge's voice cut through the tension. "We have reached a verdict." The courtroom stilled. The words came crisp and final. Guilty on 4 counts property damage, unlawful trespass, falsification of records, and harassment under color of authority. A faint exhale swept through the room, too soft to be applause, too subtle to be relief. Karen blinked once, but otherwise did not move. Her face stayed calm, but her hands had curled slightly, the only betrayal of emotion she allowed. The sentence followed with quiet precision: 6 months suspended, community service, restitution for damages, and a permanent restraining order. The gavel struck once. The sound echoed off the walls, clean and definitive. That was it. Years of subtle cruelty, layers of manipulation, all reduced to a record that would follow her wherever she went. Not vengeance, not even punishment, just accountability. The kind that does not erase the past but anchors it where it belongs. I did not move when others did. People gathered their papers and left, their footsteps soft against the polished floor. I stayed seated, watching Karen as the bailiff guided her out. She did not look back. The control she once carried had vanished. The silence she had weaponized now belonged to the court, and in that moment, she was just another person facing the system she had once abused. Outside, the courthouse steps gleamed in sunlight. The day was bright, but the light felt cool, almost metallic. I stood for a while, watching people pass by, each absorbed in their own errands, unaware of the weight that had just lifted from one small corner of the world. A reporter approached and asked if I wanted to make a statement. I said only, "Justice takes time, but it always keeps its receipts." He smiled faintly, wrote it down, and stepped away. The drive home felt longer than usual. When I turned onto Maple Crest Drive, everything looked the same. The lawns trimmed, the fences freshly painted, the illusion of order perfectly restored. Yet something invisible had shifted. The air felt lighter, the kind of calm that comes not from fear, but from resolution. The new HOA board had already been sworn in. Policies were rewritten, procedures clarified, accountability woven back into the structure that Karen had twisted into her own fiefdom. Balance had returned, not through force, but through evidence and patience. One evening, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, washing the neighborhood in gold. Across the street, a couple waved. I returned the gesture, for the first time in months. Their smiles seemed real. Later, an older neighbor stopped by, hands in his pockets, eyes soft with something like gratitude. "You kept things from falling apart," he said. I shook my head. No, the truth did that. He nodded, understanding that I was not being modest, just factual. The truth, when it finally surfaces, does not need a hero. It just needs someone to hold the line until it arrives. Weeks passed, and Maple Crest began to breathe again. The newsletters lost their sharp tone. Rules became reminders instead of threats. People started greeting one another without looking over their shoulders. Even the evening air felt different, open, unguarded. I found myself sleeping better, waking before dawn just to listen to the quiet, now free of that subtle tension that used to hum under every noise. One morning, a certified letter arrived from the county clerk. It confirmed the closure of the case, restitution completed, and compliance verified. I signed the receipt, folded the document carefully, and filed it in the same drawer that held the rest of the evidence. When I closed it, I felt something final click into place inside me. The story was no longer mine to carry. That night, I took the broken shard of glass I had kept since the first night, the fragment from the windshield with its faint red glint under the light, and set it on the porch railing. It caught the glow from the street lamp and scattered it into thin lines across the wood. That piece of glass had been the beginning of everything, the small truth that cracked open a lie built on control. Now it was just glass again. I let the reflection fade, then turned back toward the house. I sometimes wonder what Karen sees now when she looks in the mirror. Maybe nothing. Maybe, for the first time, she is seeing the person behind all the layers of authority and control she used to hide behind. Power built on fear eventually collapses inward, leaving only the echo of its own noise. And maybe that is justice too. Not just the punishment, but the silence that follows it. The forced stillness where you finally hear yourself. The neighborhood found its rhythm again. The lawns, the small talk, the smell of evening barbecue. Everything that once seemed ordinary now felt earned. The quiet had weight, but no longer carried threat. I spent more time outside, fixing small things I had ignored before. A mailbox hinge, a gutter, the old fence. Maintenance of peace is no different from maintenance of order. You do not wait for things to break before you tend to them. Every storm leaves something behind. This one left a truth I hope you carry with you. Real power is not the ability to control others. It is the discipline to control yourself. Justice is not about revenge. It is about patience. If someone ever tries to twist rules or use authority to break you, remember what Karen forgot: truth moves slowly, but it never stops moving. If you believe in stories where composure defeats corruption, where integrity dismantles deceit, and where karma always finds its mark, then you are in the right place. Follow the karma clause, where every story ends not with anger, but with balance restored, because the calmest hearts always write the strongest justice.